be still for a moment. Just a moment of genuine stillness, not the managed stillness of someone who is performing calm, but the actual quality of a consciousness that has stopped rushing forward and allowed itself to simply be where it is. Breathe. One real breath. Let it move through you rather than past you. And listen, not to the outside, not to the ambient noise of the world doing what the world does. Listen inside, to the quieter signal, the one that has been trying to reach you for longer than you may realize. I want to talk to you about trust, specifically about the trust that most people in this particular world of inner work, this world of consciousness and manifestation and the deep exploration of who you are and what is possible. The trust that most people struggle with most. Not trust in the universe, not trust in the process, not trust in the framework or the practice or the system. Trust in themselves. This is the one that gets quietly bypassed in most teachings. You are encouraged to trust the universe, to trust the field, to trust the process, and all of that has value. But underneath all of those objects of trust is a prior question that rarely gets asked directly. Do you trust yourself? Do you trust your own perception, your own sense of what is true, your own reading of your own experience? The quiet knowing that arises in you before the mind has a chance to override it with analysis and second-guessing and the accumulated opinion of every external voice you have ever consulted. I know the answer for most people who find their way to this kind of content. Not fully, not consistently, not in the deep, unshakable way that would make everything else in this work feel natural rather than effortful. You know what you know. You feel what you feel. You have a genuine, functioning, extraordinarily capable instrument of knowing inside you an internal sense of truth that has been accurate far more times than you have given it credit for. And yet, consistently, you take that knowing and you run it through a gauntlet. You check it against the framework. You check it against what the teacher or the tradition says. You check it against what the person you respect most in this space would think. You check it against every external authority that feels more reliable than the internal one. And sometimes the knowing survives the gauntlet, but often it doesn't. Often it gets diluted or overridden or simply quietly abandoned as you adopt the external view in place of the internal one. Why? Why does the internal knowing so consistently lose to the external authority? Because at some point, again, usually early, usually in a formative context, the message arrived that your knowing was not reliable, that your perception was not trustworthy, that your reading of your own experience needed to be corrected or adjusted or supervised by someone who knew better. Maybe it was explicit, a parent or teacher or adult who consistently told you that what you thought you felt or knew or understood was wrong, that you were misreading the situation, that the real truth was something different from the thing your internal sense was reporting, that your instincts were off. Maybe it was subtler than that. Maybe it was simply the consistent experience of your internal knowing being overridden without acknowledgement, of your sense of things never quite being the lens through which the household or the classroom or the relationship operated. Your perception existed. It simply wasn't the one that mattered. Either way, the lesson arrived. Your knowing is not the authority. Look elsewhere. Check outside. Find someone who knows better than you do what is true for you. And so you learn to outsource. You learn to outsource your truth knowing to teachers, to frameworks, to traditions, to the people in your life who seemed more certain than you, to the books that seemed to contain the answer you couldn't quite find inside yourself. You became, with great sincerity and genuine intelligence, a very skilled consumer of other people's knowing, in the hope that enough consumption of the right knowing from the right sources would eventually produce the certainty and the peace and the clarity that the internal authority was supposed to provide but had been deemed unreliable. The seeking has been real, the searching has been real, and much of what you found along the way has been genuinely valuable. But nothing you have found outside yourself has produced the specific quality of certainty and peace that was available from the beginning in the source you were taught to distrust. Because the thing you are looking for, when you follow the thread of all the searching all the way to its deepest root, is not more information. It is not the right teacher or the right framework or the right understanding of how consciousness and reality work. What you are looking for is the experience of knowing what is true for you and trusting that knowing completely. The experience of your own internal sense of truth as the primary authority in your life. Not the only input, but the primary one. The one that you check everything else against rather than the one you check against everything else. That experience is available. It was always available. It lives in the instrument that has been inside you your entire life, functioning accurately far more consistently than you have allowed yourself to acknowledge. Feel it right now, that quiet sense. Underneath the analysis, underneath the wondering what the right answer is, underneath the habit of looking outward, that quiet, pre-verbal, completely unambiguous sense of what is true. It is there. It is always there. You can feel it right now if you give it your attention rather than immediately routing that attention toward the nearest external authority. What does it say? Not about a specific question or situation. Just in this moment, what does it say? What is its quality? What does it feel like in your body to give your attention to the internal signal rather than immediately looking for the external one? Most people, when they do this honestly, feel something unexpected. They feel how much the internal signal actually knows, how precise it is, how consistent it has been across years of experience in pointing accurately toward what was true and what was not, what was aligned and what was not, what was right for them specifically even when it contradicted what the external authorities were saying. The internal signal was right more often than the externals overriding it. And some part of you already knows this. That part of you has been watching the outsourcing happen, has been patiently noticing that the external authorities sometimes helped and sometimes didn't, sometimes illuminated and sometimes added confusion, sometimes offered something genuinely useful, and sometimes simply replaced one form of uncertainty with another. That part of you has been watching and noting and waiting for the day when you would finally recognize it as the authority it has always been. Today is that day. Not in a dramatic way, in the quiet way that real recognitions arrive, the recognition that you're knowing. Your specific, particular, individual, irreplaceable knowing of your own experience and your own truth and your own path is the primary instrument, is the thing that leads, is the authority that the external inputs serve rather than the thing that serves the external authorities. This does not mean closing yourself off from learning. It does not mean that teachers and traditions and frameworks have nothing to offer. It means that you receive all of those things through the filter of your own knowing rather than using all of those things to replace it. You take in what is offered and you feel whether it is true for you. Not whether it is logically consistent or sufficiently well-credentialed or supported by the people you respect. Whether it is true for you. Whether the internal signal says, yes, this is accurate, this resonates, this is mine. Or whether it says something more neutral or more skeptical or simply quiet. And you trust the internal signal. Even when it disagrees with the external authority. Even when the external authority is someone very credible, very confident, very certain of their position. Even when the external authority is the majority of voices in a community you belong to, and trusting your internal signal means standing slightly apart from the consensus. Especially then, because those are the moments that test whether the internal knowing is actually your authority or just a preference you hold when it conveniently aligns with everything else. Your knowing is real. It is precise. It is uniquely qualified to know what is true for the specific, irreplaceable person you are because it is made of you, informed by you, oriented entirely toward your specific life and your specific truth and your specific path. No external authority has that qualification. No teacher, no tradition, no framework, no community consensus. Only you, through the instrument that has been functioning inside you since before you knew what to call it. Trust it, not as a leap of faith, as a recognition of what has always been the most reliable thing in your possession. You have always known. You simply need to stop requiring permission from the outside to believe what the inside has been saying all along. Trust yourself. It is not arrogance. It is the most honest and accurate thing you can do. You are the authority on your own life. You always were.